Jack Nicholson has always lived by one code: truth. Not polite truth, not the version written in a press release, but the kind that cuts through silence and makes everyone in the room uncomfortable. For 6 decades, he trusted instinct more than charm and loyalty more than fame. When someone broke that code, they didn't get a second chance. He never shouted, he never begged for respect. He simply shut the door, lit a cigarette, and never opened it again. And now, at the end of a legendary career, he's finally revealing the 6 names that crossed that line. Marlon Brando, the fallen idol. For Nicholson, the first betrayal was also the most painful. Marlon Brando wasn't just another actor. He was the reason Nicholson believed in film in the first place. Brando's explosive performances in A Streetcar Named Desire and On the Waterfront changed Hollywood forever. For a young Jack Nicholson, arriving in Los Angeles in the late 1950s, Brando was the North Star. He was proof that acting could be raw, dangerous, and alive. By the time Nicholson broke through with Easy Rider in 1969, Brando was still a godlike figure. So when Arthur Penn cast both men in the 1976 Western The Missouri Breaks, Nicholson thought he was walking into a dream. The expectation was a meeting of titans, the old master and the new rebel side by side. But the reality left Nicholson devastated. Brando had long since lost interest in discipline. He showed up to set overweight, uninterested, and notoriously unprepared. Rather than memorizing dialogue, he insisted on reading lines off cue cards taped to props or even to the foreheads of crew members. Nicholson, who lived by preparation and truth, felt humiliated by what he saw as Brando's laziness. It wasn't eccentricity, Nicholson would later say. It was indulgence. Brando toyed with strange accents, improvised costumes, and choices that distracted from the story. At one point, he even showed up to a scene wearing a bonnet, turning a serious drama into farce. Nicholson admitted that the experience broke his heart. Watching the man who had once defined authenticity now treating film like a private game felt like betrayal. The movie flopped, critics panned it, and the two never worked together again. Nicholson always acknowledged Brando's genius in the 1950s, but after the Missouri Breaks he never hid his disappointment. To him, Brando had stopped respecting the work, and in Nicholson's world there was no coming back from that. Meryl Streep, precision meets chaos. If Marlon Brando was the idol who broke his heart, Meryl Streep was the peer who never earned his trust. By the mid-1980s, Nicholson was at the peak of his powers, a 3-time Oscar nominee with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Chinatown, and The Shining behind him. Streep, meanwhile, was already considered the actress of her generation, with Academy Awards for Kramer vs. Kramer and Sophie's Choice. When Mike Nichols cast them together in Heartburn, it seemed like the perfect pairing. 2 giants of the screen playing opposite one another in a story based on Nora Ephron's turbulent marriage to Carl Bernstein. But instead of fireworks, Nicholson found only friction. Streep was famously meticulous, rehearsing every gesture, reviewing playback, and approaching each line as though it were carved into stone. Nicholson thrived on the opposite. He wanted to find the moment in real time, to improvise, to let instinct guide him. The contrast was immediate and obvious. Crew members later recalled that watching them act together felt like watching 2 different movies being filmed on the same set. Streep's scalpel-like precision clashed with Nicholson's hammer-like force. There was no shouting, no scandal, but the tension was visible in their distance. Streep stayed behind after takes, analyzing footage. Nicholson, in typical fashion, would light a cigarette and vanish until the next setup. At one point, Nichols asked Jack to rein in his energy for the sake of balance. Nicholson glanced towards Streep and muttered, "If I'm loud and she's quiet, we meet in the middle." It was half joke, half philosophy, but it summed up the impasse. The film itself received mixed reviews, and though both actors were praised individually, neither seemed eager for a repeat collaboration. Nicholson never badmouthed Streep publicly, but he also never included her name when speaking about co-stars he admired. That silence, in his world, spoke volumes. Streep, for her part, has diplomatically referred to the shoot as difficult, leaving it at that. In later years, when asked if he would work with her again, Nicholson only smiled and replied, "Once was enough." For him, Streep represented a kind of acting he didn't believe in. Controlled, rehearsed, too safe. It wasn't about dislike, it was about incompatibility. And once Nicholson sensed that, the door quietly closed. Tom Cruise, the technician without soul. By the early 1990s, Tom Cruise was Hollywood's golden boy. With Top Gun and Born on the 4th of July, 1989, under his belt, he was one of the biggest stars in the world. Young, ambitious, and hungry to prove he could hold his own with legends. In 1992, he got his chance. Rob Reiner cast him opposite Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men, pairing the 30-year-old Cruise with Nicholson, who by then was in his 50s and already a Hollywood institution. The showdown between Colonel Nathan Jessup and Lieutenant Daniel Kaffee became one of the most iconic confrontations in cinema. But behind the courtroom drama, Nicholson walked away unimpressed. To him, Cruise represented the very thing he despised in acting: calculation. Nicholson built his career on risk, instinct, and the thrill of the unexpected. Cruise arrived on set polished, rehearsed, and exact, every beat measured to the millisecond. He ran lines endlessly, tweaked delivery, adjusted timing. For many directors, this discipline was a gift. For Nicholson, it felt mechanical, like watching a machine work instead of a man live. The contrast was especially clear during the filming of their legendary "You Can't Handle the Truth" scene. Nicholson, who could have finished his part in one day, stayed for all 3 days of filming, watching Cruise work, testing him, probing for something raw. But as Jack later confided, all he saw was a performance perfected in the mirror. He respected Cruise's drive, but found no weight behind it. As he once muttered on set, "You can choreograph lines, but you can't choreograph soul." Awards season came, and while Cruise campaigned tirelessly, Nicholson kept his distance. Their paths never crossed again. Cruise reportedly expressed interest in working with him later, even sending a script, but Nicholson never responded. It wasn't personal. It was philosophical. Jack believed acting should be dangerous, alive, and a little messy. Cruise delivered perfection, but Nicholson only saw emptiness beneath the shine. For Jack, Tom Cruise symbolized the new Hollywood, polished, disciplined, engineered for success. But in Nicholson's eyes, that wasn't art, it was execution. And execution without danger had no place in his world. Leonardo DiCaprio, too careful to be dangerous. By 2006, Leonardo DiCaprio had already shed the image of the boy from Titanic and reinvented himself as a serious actor. Films like The Aviator and The Gangs of New York had proven his commitment to craft, and working with Martin Scorsese had given him credibility as the next great leading man of his generation. When Scorsese assembled the cast for The Departed, pairing DiCaprio with Jack Nicholson felt like destiny. Nicholson then, in his late 60s, would play the ruthless mob boss Frank Costello, while DiCaprio, 30 years his junior, would take on the role of the undercover cop Billy Costigan. It was billed as a symbolic passing of the torch. On screen, their chemistry was undeniable. Their scenes cracked with menace and tension. But behind the camera, Nicholson found himself growing frustrated. To him, DiCaprio was too careful, too protective of his image. He admired the younger actor's preparation and intensity, but felt smothered by the weight of it. DiCaprio was meticulous. He stayed in character between takes, avoided unnecessary small talk, and approached every scene like a blueprint. For Nicholson, who thrived on chaos and instinct, this was suffocating. There's a story from the set that illustrates the divide. In one of their tense confrontations, Nicholson unexpectedly pulled out a real gun. Scorsese kept rolling, and the shock on DiCaprio's face was genuine. For Nicholson, that kind of danger was the essence of acting, forcing your partner into a moment where nothing was rehearsed. But insiders said DiCaprio didn't see it as artistry. He saw it as destabilizing, even hostile. To Nicholson, that reaction confirmed what he already suspected. Leo had built walls around his performance, and nothing truly unpredictable could get through. In later interviews, Nicholson never directly insulted DiCaprio, but his comments carried sharp undertones. Asked about younger actors, he said, "I like people who leave room for accidents, not rehearsals." It was a philosophy DiCaprio never shared. They made one of the best films of the 2000s together, but they never worked again. For Nicholson, DiCaprio was a master craftsman, brick by brick constructing flawless performances. But Nicholson didn't want to see the bricks. He wanted a house that might collapse at any second. Without that danger, the work didn't feel alive. And in Jack's world, that was unforgivable. Faye Dunaway, When Collaboration Turns to War. If some actors disappointed Nicholson quietly, his relationship with Faye Dunaway turned into open warfare. In 1974, the two had created one of cinema's greatest masterpieces with Roman Polanski's Chinatown. Nicholson's Jake Gitz and Dunaway's Evelyn Mulwray were electric together, their chemistry giving the film its tragic power. Nicholson admired her then, committed, luminous, the perfect partner for a story that defined an era of filmmaking. But when Nicholson stepped behind the camera in 1990 to direct The Two Jakes, the long-awaited sequel to Chinatown, the dynamic collapsed. Nicholson wanted Dunaway back to reprise her role, but by the time production began, their creative relationship had curdled. Crew members recalled her arriving late, sometimes hours behind schedule, and constantly arguing over dialogue, blocking, or even the smallest creative choices. To Nicholson, this wasn't collaboration, it was sabotage. As a director, Nicholson believed in trust. He needed actors who would meet him halfway, who would bring energy to the table without trying to seize control. With Dunaway, he felt none of that. Their arguments became legendary on set, escalating to the point where Nicholson reportedly considered firing her mid-shoot. At one particularly heated moment, he told her she was impossible to direct. For someone who demanded absolute loyalty to the work, the constant battles drained him. The fallout spread beyond their personal feud. Scenes had to be rewritten to minimize their interaction, and the atmosphere poisoned the entire production. The Two Jakes stumbled at the box office and was dismissed by critics as a pale shadow of its predecessor. For Nicholson, it was more than a commercial disappointment. It was an artistic wound. Directing was supposed to be his chance to control the canvas, to leave behind a legacy as both actor and filmmaker. Instead, it became a war zone, with Dunaway at the center. Afterward, Nicholson withdrew from directing, scarred by the experience. He continued to act, but his relationship with Dunaway was finished. The trust that had made Chinatown immortal was gone, replaced by bitterness. For Nicholson, she became the example of what happens when ego overwhelms craft. The memory of their conflict followed him for decades, a cautionary tale he never forgot. Shelley Duvall, When Instinct Meets Fragility. Some of Nicholson's clashes came from ego, some from philosophy. But with Shelley Duvall, it was something darker, a collision between two very different kinds of vulnerability. In 1980, Stanley Kubrick's The Shining united Nicholson, at the height of his power with Duvall, cast as Wendy Torrance, the fragile wife trapped in the Overlook Hotel. On screen, their tension became iconic. Behind the camera, it left scars that never fully healed. Kubrick's methods were infamous. He pushed his actors to the brink, demanding over 100 takes for a single shot, manipulating emotions until they collapsed. Nicholson, disciplined and fiercely trained, managed to channel that pressure into volcanic energy. He turned frustration into Jack Torrance's rage. But for Duvall, the approach was devastating. Her gift was transparency, her ability to show fear and fragility without artifice. Under Kubrick's relentless assault, That gift crumbled into instability. Nicholson never yelled at her, never mocked her, but he withdrew. He believed acting was like jazz. You needed a partner who could keep rhythm, even when improvising. With Duvall, he felt the rhythm collapse. One moment she was brilliant, the next she seemed lost, drowning in the chaos Kubrick created. An assistant director remembered Nicholson walking off set after a scene and muttering, "I don't know if this is a performance or a breakdown." The truth was more complicated. Nicholson respected Duvall's courage, but he couldn't trust her consistency. For him, the work was sacred, and unpredictability born of trauma wasn't artistry. It was dysfunction. When the cameras stopped, he never sought another collaboration. Unlike with Brando or Dunaway, there was no anger, just finality. He saw Duvall as collateral damage of Kubrick's obsession, but he also knew he couldn't risk that kind of instability again. Decades later, when Duvall's mental health struggles became public, Nicholson softened. He expressed empathy for what she endured and admitted the film nearly broke them both. Still, the distance remained. In his world, loyalty meant showing up ready to work, no matter the conditions. And though The Shining became a masterpiece, it cost too much in human toll. For Nicholson, the lesson was unforgettable. Sometimes the greatest performances are built on ruins you can never rebuild. 6 names, 6 reminders that even legends have limits. For Jack Nicholson, it was never about fame or awards. It was about truth, instinct, and respect for the craft. When someone broke that code, they were gone forever. Which of these actors surprised you most on his list? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more untold stories from Hollywood's hidden history.